You think guilt is just an emotion, something that comes and goes, a feeling you can ignore or suppress or explain away with the right justification, and most people treat it that way. They try to rationalize it, they tell themselves they had good reasons, they convince themselves it wasn't really their fault, they push it down and try to move on. But I discovered something different, something I explored through one character who tried everything to escape his guilt and found that the harder he ran, the deeper it became. The more he tried to justify himself, the more his conscience tormented him. The more he insisted he was right, the more he fell apart from the inside. Guilt is not just an emotion, it's not a temporary feeling that fades with time. It's not something you can think your way out of or rationalize into submission. Guilt is the voice of your humanity. It's your soul recognizing that you violated something fundamental. It's the deepest part of you refusing to accept what you've done. And you cannot silence it. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot escape it, no matter how clever your justifications or how strong your will. And the man who tries to live without guilt, who tries to place himself above moral law, who tries to convince himself that he's different, that the rules don't apply to him, that he can commit terrible acts for the right reasons, that man destroys himself more completely than any external punishment ever could. Let me tell you about Raskolnikov, a character I created to explore this truth. A young man who believed he could commit murder without guilt, who developed an elaborate theory to justify killing, who convinced himself he was extraordinary, above ordinary morality, and then discovered that his theory was worthless against the reality of what he had done. His story is not just fiction, it's the truth about human conscience, about what happens when you try to silence that voice inside you, about why guilt won't let you go no matter how rational you think you are. I wrote Crime and Punishment in 1866. I was 44 years old, living in poverty, gambling away what little money I had, drowning in debt, and I was writing this novel in installments, writing it as fast as I could to meet deadlines and pay creditors, writing it in a state of desperation and fever. But what came out was something deeper than I intended, something that revealed truths I had been wrestling with my entire life. The question at the heart of the novel is this: can an extraordinary person commit a crime for the right reasons and be justified in doing so? Can someone place themselves above moral law if they're intelligent enough, strong enough, special enough? Can you murder someone who's worthless and use the proceeds to do good and not be guilty because your ends justify your means? Raskolnikov believes he can. He's a former student, brilliant, handsome, proud, but desperately poor, living in a tiny room barely large enough to contain a bed, surviving on almost nothing, watching his mother and sister sacrifice everything for him while he can do nothing to help them. And he develops a theory. He divides humanity into two categories: ordinary people who must obey moral laws, and extraordinary people who have the right to step over those laws, to transgress, to commit crimes if necessary to achieve something great. He thinks of Napoleon, who killed thousands to reshape Europe. He thinks of great men throughout history who broke the rules and changed the world, and he asks himself, am I ordinary or extraordinary? Am I one of those who must obey, or one of those who can transgress? And to test his theory, to prove he's extraordinary, he decides to commit murder. There's an old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, a miserly, cruel old woman who lends money at terrible rates and keeps everything locked away while people suffer around her. And Raskolnikov convinces himself that killing her would be justified. She's worthless. She's making the world worse. And with her money he could do good. He could help his mother and sister. He could finish his education and contribute something meaningful to society. It's a utilitarian calculation, one worthless life against all the good he could do with her money. And by his theory, an extraordinary person would not hesitate, would not feel guilt, would simply act and move forward. So he plans the murder carefully. He visits her apartment several times to pawn items and learn the layout. He steals an axe. He chooses a time when she'll be alone. He goes through every detail with cold rationality, convincing himself with logic and theory and intellectual justification. And then he does it. He kills her with the axe, and in that moment everything changes. His theory crumbles instantly. The moment the axe comes down and her blood spills, all his justifications become worthless. All his calculations about extraordinary and ordinary people disappear. All his intellectual certainty evaporates, and what's left is the raw horror of what he's done, the reality that no theory can protect you from. But it gets worse. Alyona's sister Lizaveta returns unexpectedly, and he has to kill her too, this gentle, innocent woman who never harmed anyone, who has nothing to do with his theory or his justifications, and now he's a double murderer, standing in an apartment with 2 dead bodies and blood on his hands, and his mind screaming at him. He takes some items, some money, but he barely knows what he's doing. He's in a state of shock and horror, and he stumbles back to his room and collapses into fever and delirium. And this is where the real story begins, not with the murder itself, but with what comes after, with Raskolnikov's desperate attempt to escape the guilt that begins to consume him from the moment he committed the act. And what I showed through his suffering is this: guilt is not something external. It's not punishment imposed from outside. It's your own conscience destroying you from within. It's the deepest part of you recognizing that you've violated something fundamental and refusing to let you forget it. Raskolnikov tries everything to escape. He tries rationalization. He reminds himself of his theory. He tells himself the old woman was worthless. He insists he was justified. But the more he repeats these arguments, the more hollow they sound. The more he tries to convince himself, the more his mind rejects his own justifications. He tries distraction. He forces himself to think about other things, to focus on practical matters, to engage in normal activities, but the memory returns constantly, forcing itself into his consciousness, the image of the blood, the sound of the axe, the look in Lizaveta's eyes. He tries pride. He tells himself he's strong enough to bear this. He's extraordinary after all. He can carry the burden of what he's done, but his pride becomes torture. Every attempt to prove his strength only reveals his weakness. Every time he tries to demonstrate he's not affected, he falls deeper into paranoia and fear. He tries isolation. He avoids people. He stays in his room. He thinks that if he can just be alone, he can control his thoughts. But isolation makes everything worse. The guilt grows in the silence. It fills every space. It becomes the only thing he can hear, his own conscience screaming at him in the emptiness. And through all of this, his body rebels. He develops a fever that won't break. He can't eat. He can't sleep properly. His hands shake. His heart races. His mind swings between clarity and delirium. Because you see, the body knows. The body cannot be fooled by rational justifications. The body responds to the truth of what you've done regardless of what your mind tries to tell itself. The guilt is not just psychological. It's physical. It's your entire being rejecting what you've done, refusing to accept it, punishing you with symptoms that no doctor can cure because the sickness is in your soul. Let me tell you what I learned through writing Raskolnikov's suffering, through exploring every twist and turn of his tormented conscience. Guilt is the proof of your humanity. It's the sign that you're not a monster. It's your soul's refusal to accept what you've become. Raskolnikov's theory said that extraordinary people can transgress without guilt. That's what separates them from ordinary people, their ability to step over moral boundaries without remorse. But the theory was wrong, fundamentally wrong, because the ability to commit crime without guilt doesn't make you extraordinary. It makes you less than human. It makes you a monster. And the fact that Raskolnikov cannot escape his guilt proves that he's not a monster, proves that he's human, proves that there's something in him that recognizes the evil of what he's done. And this is the terrible paradox. The guilt that tortures him is also his salvation. The conscience that won't let him rest is also the only thing that can save him from becoming truly lost. Because a man without conscience is beyond redemption. A man who can kill without guilt has lost his humanity completely. But a man who suffers from his guilt, who cannot escape it, who is torn apart by it, that man can still be saved, can still find his way back to humanity, can still be redeemed. Now let me show you how the guilt manifests, because it's not just one feeling. It's a complex web of torment that attacks from every direction, that finds every weakness, that exploits every fear. First there's the paranoia. Raskolnikov becomes convinced that everyone knows, that everyone can see his guilt, that every conversation is a trap, that every question is an accusation. He meets the detective Porfiry Petrovich, who suspects him but has no proof, and their conversations become a psychological chess game. Porfiry probing and hinting and suggesting, Raskolnikov defending and deflecting, and trying to appear innocent while convinced that Porfiry knows everything, can see through every lie, is just playing with him before making the arrest. But here's what's fascinating. Porfiry's method is to do almost nothing, to just let Raskolnikov torture himself, to plant small doubts, and then watch as Raskolnikov's own guilt does the work. because the guilty person becomes their own prosecutor, their own judge, their own executioner. You don't need to prove anything to someone consumed by guilt. You just need to give them space to destroy themselves. And Raskolnikov does exactly this. He makes mistakes he wouldn't make if he were thinking clearly. He says things that raise suspicion. He acts in ways that draw attention, all because his guilt is consuming his judgment, clouding his mind, making him his own worst enemy. Second, there's the physical revulsion. Every time Raskolnikov sees blood, even just the color red, his body reacts with visceral horror. His heart pounds, his hands shake, he feels nauseous, and he cannot control these reactions no matter how much he tries to master himself, because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. The body holds the truth that rationalization tries to deny. He cannot bear certain sounds, certain smells, certain sights that remind him even tangentially of what he did. His entire sensory world becomes a minefield of triggers, and he cannot escape because the triggers are everywhere, in everyday life, in normal experiences, in things that never bothered him before, but now send him into panic. Third, there's the isolation, but not the isolation he chose, a different kind, a loneliness that comes from the unbridgeable distance between himself and everyone else. He cannot connect with people anymore. He cannot have normal conversations. He cannot feel normal emotions, because he's carrying this terrible secret that separates him from all humanity. He sees his mother and sister, and he cannot receive their love because he feels unworthy. He knows what he is, what he's done, and their affection becomes torture. Every expression of love is a reminder of how far he's fallen. Every kind word is a knife in his conscience. He meets Sonia, a young woman forced into prostitution to support her family, and she becomes the only person he can talk to, the only person who might understand, because she too carries shame. She too knows what it means to violate yourself, to do something that tears at your soul. But even with Sonia, the distance remains. He's drawn to her but cannot fully connect. He wants her understanding but cannot accept her forgiveness. He sees in her something he's lost and cannot reclaim. Fourth, there's the degradation of his self-image. Raskolnikov's entire identity was built on his intelligence, his superiority, his potential to be extraordinary. But the guilt strips all of this away. He sees himself clearly for the first time, and what he sees is not an extraordinary person but a pathetic fool, not a Napoleon but a trembling murderer, not someone above morality but someone crushed by it. His pride, which was supposed to sustain him, becomes his greatest torment. Every time he tries to assert his theory, every time he tries to justify himself, his mind shows him the truth. You're not extraordinary. You're not above moral law. You're just a person who committed murder and is now falling apart. And this destruction of his self-image is more painful than any external punishment, because it's the death of who he thought he was. And fifth, perhaps most devastating, there's the loss of meaning. Before the murder, Raskolnikov had a purpose, however twisted. He was testing his theory, proving he was extraordinary, planning to do great things with the money. But after the murder, all meaning drains away. The money becomes worthless. He can't even bring himself to count it. His theory is revealed as hollow, his plans evaporate, and what's left is just the act itself, murder without purpose, death without meaning, suffering without justification. He killed for nothing, destroyed 2 lives and his own soul for nothing, and this meaninglessness is unbearable, because if the murder had meaning he could at least hold on to that, could tell himself it served some purpose. But it didn't. It was just destruction, just evil, just waste. Now let me tell you what I understood through Raskolnikov's Torment. Guilt is not irrational. It's not a weakness to overcome. It's not a social conditioning to transcend. Guilt is the voice of reality. It's your conscience telling you the truth that your rational mind tries to deny. Raskolnikov's theory said that morality is relative, that extraordinary people can create their own values, that the ends justify the means, but his guilt proves the theory wrong. Proves that morality is not something you can rationalize away, proves that there are fundamental boundaries that you violate at your own peril. And here's what's crucial to understand. The guilt is not imposed from outside. Society didn't make him feel guilty. Religious conditioning didn't create his torment. No external authority is punishing him. The guilt comes from within, from the deepest part of his own nature, from his humanity rebelling against what he's done. This is why all his rationalizations fail. Why his theory provides no protection, why his intelligence gives him no escape, because you cannot argue with your own conscience, you cannot logic your way out of guilt, You cannot think yourself free from the truth of what you've done. Let me show you the turning point, after months of torment, after his mind and body are nearly destroyed, after he's alienated everyone who cares about him. Raskolnikov comes to Sonia and tells her what he did. He confesses the murder, and she reacts not with horror or condemnation but with compassion. She weeps for him. She sees his suffering. And then she tells him what he must do. You must go, stand at the crossroads. Bow down, kiss the earth you have defiled, and then bow to all the world, to the four corners of the earth, and say aloud to all the world, I am a murderer, then God will send you life again. And this is not religious superstition, this is psychological truth. The only way to escape the guilt is not to rationalize it or suppress it or explain it away. The only way is to confess it, to admit it, to take full responsibility for what you've done, to stop hiding from the truth and face it completely. Confession doesn't remove the guilt magically, doesn't make what you did acceptable, doesn't erase the harm, but it transforms the guilt from a poison that destroys you into something you can carry. It turns the secret that's eating you alive into a truth you've acknowledged. It brings what's hidden in darkness into light where it can be dealt with. Raskolnikov resists this at first, his pride rebels, his theory protests, his rational mind finds 1,000 reasons why he shouldn't confess. But the guilt won't stop, it keeps tearing at him, keeps destroying him from within, and finally, he understands that his only choice is surrender or death, and not just physical death but spiritual death, the complete destruction of his humanity. So he goes to the police station, and multiple times he almost turns back. His pride keeps rising up, his theory keeps whispering that he can still escape, that confession is weakness, that an extraordinary person would never break. But each time Sonia's words return, you must confess, you must take responsibility, you must face the truth. And when he finally does it, when he walks into the police station and says I am the murderer, something breaks open inside him, not relief exactly, not joy, but something like the first breath after drowning, like the end of a terrible fever, like waking from a nightmare, because he's finally stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped trying to escape what he cannot escape. The confession doesn't end his suffering. He's sent to Siberia, to hard labor, to years of exile and punishment, but the confession ends the worst suffering, the self-inflicted torment, the guilt that was destroying him from within. In prison, slowly, painfully, gradually, he begins to come back to himself, begins to reconnect with his humanity, begins to feel again like a human being and not a monster. And this is possible only because he confessed, only because he took responsibility, only because he stopped trying to justify himself and admitted the truth. And through this I showed what I had learned, that guilt is not your enemy, it's your humanity's last defense against becoming something less than human. It's the voice that won't let you forget what you are, what you've done, what you're capable of becoming if you continue down the wrong path. Now let me tell you why this matters for you, for your life, because you may not have committed murder, you may not have Raskolnikov's guilt, but everyone carries guilt of some kind. Everyone has done things they regret. Everyone has violated their own values. Everyone has hurt others. Everyone has betrayed their own conscience in small or large ways. And the question is not whether you have guilt. The question is what you do with it. Do you run from it like Raskolnikov tried to do? Do you rationalize it away? Do you suppress it and hope it disappears? Do you build elaborate justifications to protect yourself from facing the truth? Or do you listen to it? Do you let it speak to you? Do you recognize it as the voice of your humanity trying to tell you something important? Because guilt is not random. It's not irrational. It's not weakness. Guilt is your conscience recognizing that you violated something fundamental, that you've acted against your own deepest values, that you've become someone you're not meant to be. And when you feel guilt, when it won't leave you alone, when it keeps coming back no matter how hard you try to suppress it, that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of your humanity. That's proof that you still have a conscience, that you still have the capacity for moral recognition. The people who should worry are not the ones who feel guilt. The people who should worry are the ones who don't feel it, who can hurt others without remorse, who can violate their values without consequence, who can commit terrible acts and sleep peacefully. Those people have lost something essential, have disconnected from their own humanity, have become the monsters that Raskolnikov feared becoming. So if you feel guilt, if something you did won't leave you alone, if your conscience keeps speaking to you no matter how hard you try to silence it, Don't treat it as an enemy to defeat. Don't see it as weakness to overcome. Recognize it as your humanity calling you back, as your soul refusing to accept what you've become, as your deepest self demanding that you face the truth. And here's what you must do, what Raskolnikov finally learned after so much suffering. You must face it. You must acknowledge it. You must take responsibility for what you've done. Not to be punished, not to be condemned, but to be freed from the tyranny of the secret, from the poison of the hidden guilt, from the torment of running from yourself. Confession doesn't mean public announcement, doesn't mean telling everyone your secrets. Confession means first admitting the truth to yourself without justification or rationalization, seeing clearly what you did and why you did it and what it means, and then, if appropriate, acknowledging it to those you've harmed, making amends where possible, taking responsibility where you can. But most importantly, confession means stopping the internal war, stopping the attempt to convince yourself that you weren't really wrong, stopping the endless justifications that exhaust your mind and poison your soul, stopping the flight from your own conscience, and instead turning to face it, listening to what it's trying to tell you, letting it guide you back to who you're meant to be. This is hard, this is terrifying, this requires a humility that pride resists, but it's the only path to freedom, the only way to transform guilt from a poison that destroys you into a teacher that guides you, the only way to reclaim your humanity after you've violated it. Let me tell you what I learned from writing Crime and Punishment, from exploring every depth of Raskolnikov's torment, from following him through hell and back. Punishment is not what happens to you from outside. Punishment is what happens inside you when you violate your own conscience. The real punishment is not prison or exile or execution. The real punishment is the guilt that won't let you rest, that won't let you forget, that won't let you be at peace with yourself. And redemption is not about escaping punishment. Redemption is about facing your guilt, acknowledging your crime, taking responsibility for what you've done, and slowly, painfully, gradually rebuilding your humanity. This is not comfortable religion, not easy forgiveness, not cheap grace. This is the hard truth about human conscience, about what it costs to violate yourself, about what it takes to come back from that violation, and about why guilt, despite all its pain, is actually a gift, a terrible gift perhaps, but a gift nonetheless, because it's what keeps you human, what prevents you from becoming a monster, what gives you the chance to return to yourself even after you've betrayed yourself. So when guilt won't leave you alone, when it keeps coming back despite all your efforts to suppress it, when it speaks in the night when everything else is silent, listen to it. It's not your enemy. It's your humanity refusing to let you go. It's your conscience insisting that you're better than what you've done. It's your soul demanding that you face the truth and find your way back. This is what Raskolnikov learned. This is what I learned through writing him. And this is what I'm offering you now, the understanding that guilt is not weakness but strength, not curse but blessing, not punishment but path, the painful, necessary path back to your own humanity.